You know, it's a beautiful Sunday, day after what most in the South call a football Saturday. As far as I know, I think everyone's teams were successful, at least around here. Thinking back to my youth, you know, football comes to mind, and I wasn't as lucky as most folks my age and all my friends. I didn't get to start playing football until I was in 8th grade. And see, where I came from up in New Jersey, you had a weight limit. And if you were over that weight limit, you didn't get to play. So I never got to play until junior high school down here. And I remember back to a game in 1978, went down to Legion Field to see Alabama play. Ray, you were already gone then, right? You were not long out of school, but Ray was already gone. But they were playing the Trojans of Southern California, USC. And I was walking around the stadium, and I walked down to the field, and we had a chain link fence, and stood right next to the football players. And I just remember how huge they looked, larger than life, giants. Then I walked around to the west side of the field where USC sidelines was, and I saw what giants really looked like. They were huge. They were really giants when it came to football play. And I can remember leaving that game that day thinking to myself, all expectations, hopes, and dreams that I have of ever playing college football were gone. There is no way on this earth that I could play with or against those guys. It was just impossible. And I can't help but tell you that really burst my bubble. Because I had a lot of people telling me that, you know, maybe if, hopefully one day you do this and you do that and things work out, you know, you might have a chance to play. Well, I can just tell you that dream ended that day. And I just had no hope at all. And so as the next few years came and went, I was very fortunate, and I can tell you that I ended up going to the University of Alabama nothing but by the grace of God. That's all it was. Now, I did a few things on my part, but I think for whatever reason you can say, I think that it was part of God's plan for me to be there, because for all intents and purposes I probably shouldn't have, but I did. And you know, for the last 38 years, been a true blessing to me. But I think back to that Alabama USC game that Alabama lost, by the way, pretty badly. I think back how that impacted my life, and I remember the feeling that I had. I really wasn't that disappointed that Alabama lost. I just felt defeated because my hopes and dreams of what I would like to be one day were gone. And this was totally contrary to everything that my mom and dad told me. They would say, son, you can be anything you want to be. And that went on for a lot. and I had that down in the back of my mind. I want to go back to the scripture this morning. A story that I'm sure that most of you are well aware of. This was after God used Moses to free the Hebrew slaves from Egypt. This is at the end of their 40 years of wandering in the desert. They're heading toward the promised land. It's not far off. In fact, they can see it. So God tells Moses, gather ye up one person from each tribe and send them over there to check it out. So they did. And I'll be honest with you, and maybe you're the same, but out of the 12 spies, as they're called, I could only name 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua. Never heard of the other 10. I'm sure I've heard of them. I'm sure I've read it. Shemua, Shaphat, Igal, Palti, Gadiel, Gadai, Amiel, Shuther, Nabi, and Jeuel. Those are the other 10. Probably a good reason I couldn't remember them, because I can barely pronounce their names. And here's what they had to say when they came back. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community of Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account, saying, we went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey, and here's the fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. These 10 explorers of the promised land come back with a bad report. Kind of like I did when I came home from that football game. Hey, guess what? Those folks are too big. They're too fast. They're too strong. They're too powerful. They've got way more than we've got. They outnumber us 10 to 1. There's no way that we can take that land. I don't care what you say, Moses. It ain't going to happen. We might as well come up with a plan B. That's what they said, in essence. Then in verse 30, Caleb spoke up, silenced the people before Moses, and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the men who had gone up with him says, we can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people saw there was a great size. We saw the Nephilim. You remember the Nephilim, the giants. They were descendants of the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Well, I can tell you that's how I felt. I felt like a grasshopper among giants when I went down to that football game. Now I want to ask each one of you today, when you think back at times in your life, maybe from your childhood, maybe from your young adult years, maybe it's something from the last year or two, Maybe it's something that's going on in your life today. Have you ever felt like you were facing an insurmountable obstacle? Have you ever felt like there were giants in your path? Have you ever felt like there was a Mount Everest standing between you and the promised land? Well, I can tell you I have many times. You know, about 25 years ago, I was going through a time in my life, I would say, fall under the dry spell category. I was all alone. Looks like a cotton picking combine just drove by. Afraid that was a fire truck. But during this dry spell in my life, I kind of felt like the 10 spies that went over to the promised land. I just really didn't see any promise in the future. I felt like that I was doomed to live in this dry and barren land for the rest of my life. I believed that. I felt like that my lot in life was exactly where I had taken, and that there was no hope of it getting any better. Well, you've heard the story several times. I didn't give up, although I almost did. You know, I prayed and asked God to bless me with somebody who would love me. See, I was facing a mountain. I was facing a river so far I couldn't cross it, and it was a mountain and a river of loneliness. But God helped me through that time. Mary Jean and I got married, and we've loved each other through thick and thin. And most of you didn't know Mary Jean before we came here. And she was like a little road runner, Energizer bunny. She would go from daylight till dark, 90 miles an hour, cleaning, cooking, doing whatever. She just never would slow down. And then about 4 years ago, she got sick. And she went from somebody that was going from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, and I mean just all the time going, doing everything, to a time where she was spending 23 hours a day in the bed. That's a drastic change. And, you know, and for me, being the husband, the father, the man of the house, you know, I was supposed to fix things like that. But you know, there was nothing I could do but just hold her hand, hug her, and tell her I love her, and to pray for her. That was a big mountain, because I really thought that Mary Jean was going to die. Her health went downhill so fast, you know, there's no way that this could end good other than God stepping in. But you know, through it all, even though the outcome appeared likely to me, I can tell you that I never gave up hope. And I always believed that God would intervene. I always believed that God would take care of us. That's what His Scripture tells us. Now here we are 4 years later. And while Mary Jean, she appears like she's doing pretty well. She's nowhere near what she was. My expert medical assessment of her condition now is that she is about 65% of what she was. And I can tell you that's a whole lot better than it was her being in bed 23 hours a day. And I'm thankful for what God has done for our life. It's well documented, the journey that we've been on, what the doctors that God has put in our life to be able to help her to recover. Just a blessing. Now, for a minute, I want to go back to last week. And I hope you all remember last week. You know, we talked about the omni attributes of God. You know, God is all powerful. He's all knowing. God is everywhere. And I think if we took a poll, certainly of everyone here in the church today, and of most Christians around the world, we'd probably get just about 100% agreement with those three attributes of God. But yet, there's still so much doubt in this world. There's so many situations where we lack the faith of a mustard seed. You know, going back to Numbers and the 12 explorers that Moses sent out, doesn't tell us the ages of these guys. We don't really know if they walked through the Red Sea with their parents and grandparents. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But one thing is for sure and for certain, they knew the story. They knew that they had, just 40 years prior, they had been in bondage for 400 years. And that solely by the hand of God, Pharaoh relented and let them go. Not only did God secure their release, He secured their rescue by killing the Egyptians in the Red Sea. And even though, because of their disobedience, their punishment was to wander in the desert for 40 years, God still provided everything that they needed every day. So here was this God who had done all this for them over the last 40 years. And God tells them, hey, you're going to get that land of milk and honey over there, the promised land. You're going to inhabit that. Still, they doubted. They went over into the land. They saw what they saw. And 10 of them were just overwhelmed. They said, there's no way that we can compete with those folks. We might as well just give up. But Caleb and Joshua, the two faithful men of God who had faith, they probably all understood the concept of who God was and what He was about. That He was all powerful, that He was all knowing, that He was everywhere. They'd seen proof of that. Just because they know it and understand it didn't mean that they believed it in their hearts and they lived that faith. But I believe that Caleb and Joshua went over there with the other 10. They lived it, and they believed that faith in their hearts. I believe that they came back and they had it in their minds that there's no way that we can't prevail. Not because we're big or we're strong or we're fast or we're powerful, solely because the God of heaven was on their side. They didn't forget who God was and what He had done for them. Now, even though I had some discouraging times in my life, one of them was coming back from the Alabama-USC game. You know, down deep, I didn't quit working. I didn't quit trying. Kept working out, kept running, kept doing all I could do to try to be a good football player. And going on through my life, even though 25 years ago I was going through that dry spell, I can't tell you, that was probably one of the most discouraging times in my life. But I never gave up. I just still had faith in God that He would answer my prayer. Can't tell you that I wasn't frustrated. I can't tell you that that I didn't look up at the sky sometimes and say, God, how long? How long is it going to be? I don't mind waiting, but is it going to be forever? Because that's what it seemed like. Even though I got frustrated, I never gave up hope. And we know that God answered my prayer. And then over the last 4 years, we went through all the stuff with Mary Jean's health issues, and I've had a couple of my own. That Sunday was actually October the 1st last year. I stood up right here and I preached behind that little stand right there. And you remember I was just dripping sweat. I know that's not a pretty thing to think about. But I was just, it wasn't that hot in there. It was about like it is here today. And I was just sweating everywhere. Well, we know now that blood clots broke loose in my leg and they went to my lungs. Could have killed me. But for the grace of God, He kept me alive for 2 weeks until Friday the 13th of October. Went to the hospital and Dr. Strickland found the blood clots. They gave me a couple shots and felt better just like that. You know, we all go through these struggles and these times in our life when we feel like, well, it's just never going to get any better. It's never going to work out. But I can tell you that I am living proof in front of you that we can never give up. We can never lose our faith in God. And I'll tell you, over my lifetime, and I don't want to brag, and I don't want you to think that I'm bragging, but I tell you that I just feel like in my heart that I've gotten pretty good at it. Because even through those times in high school and college and in my young adult years, even though it was a tough time for me to get over, I never left my hope behind. I always had faith in God. I always remembered who God was. I always remembered, and I always took that to heart, that God knows everything. Can't even comprehend it, but God knows everything. He knows everything that each one of us need. God is everywhere. In everything, in every part of our lives, God is there. No matter where it is, God is there. And God is all powerful. The only times that I think that we as humans doubt God is just when God doesn't do it on our timetable. God can do whatever He wants. It's just that we've got to realize that it's going to happen on His schedule and not ours. So I would invite you today to just think about some of the struggles that you're going through. They may be very small. They may be momentous, mountainous, overwhelming situations that you're going through. And I would just invite you to just give it all to God. Never forget that God loves us and He wants what's best for us. But we've got to be able to believe that prayer that we say most every Sunday. Lord, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's us giving in to His power over our lives. I invite you to join me today. And if you would, let's sing a closing hymn as the musicians come.